Hey guys, it's Ken again, and I'm here with Jason Hartman, the king of single family. Hey Jason, how are you?
Hey, Ken, good. How are you?
How's Florida?
Florida is beautiful right now, just like Scottsdale. You know, I used to live in your town. I lived there for 6 years and loved it. That's where we first met. I remember
It is.
when we. Do you remember when we had breakfast many years ago?
Many years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, you've been bringing your dog too. You brought your dog to our employee
Yeah.
seminar. What was your pup's
Yeah,
name?
you know, my dog is kind of my trademark.
Yeah.
That's become part of my brand.
I know.
And that's a good way to make your animal tax deductible.
Well, I tell you what, it's been a pleasure knowing you and meeting you and listening to your teaching. And we did a really good YouTube video not long ago. It's done very well, kind of around this pandemic and pandemic investing. But let's talk about, obviously 2020 has been crazy, and it's over. Now we're in 2021, and people are kind of questioning, where are we headed? We have all kinds of things happening right now. We have new administration coming in. We got the CARES Act pumped down the road, till the end of January. And then we have all this forbearance, all these rental issues around evictions. The states have affordability issues. We have unemployment issues. So with all of that, let's discuss the rental moratorium. Obviously it's a mess. And, when somebody doesn't pay, obviously, in one of your rentals, then of course, it's a tougher. You can't really pay your mortgage, and obviously there's no cash flow, and so it's just kind of as you would say, trickle down, right?
Yeah. Well, I call this actually trickle up economics. Because when the landlord doesn't get his rent, what does he do? He plays the game of hot potato. He goes to the lender and says, "Sorry, I can't pay," and it's a mess, but it is what it is.
So how do you think the government gets us out of this?
I think, and I kind of hate to say this philosophically, but I'm coming around to the idea. On my podcast a while back, I had presidential candidate Andrew Yang, and Andrew, I don't know if you've interviewed him, but he's the one guy that ran for president when his platform was really centered around UBI, or universal basic income. And interestingly, I've been talking with a lot of my very libertarian, successful entrepreneur friends, and they just don't think, I'm surprised these guys would say this, like that they're coming around to the idea of universal basic income. And you know what? I am too. And I got to tell you, the reason is that I think forget about the pandemic, forget about the civil unrest and the new administration, whatever, right? All these crazy things going on in the world. Just technology alone is going to displace so many jobs, Ken, and it is going to take a long time for people to adapt and to retool. Now, throughout history, they always have retooled. When Elias Howe invented the sewing machine, there was an outcry from both men and women wondering, what will women do with all their spare time? I think we figured that out. Okay.
I dare you to bring that up today.
Yeah, I know. You'd get slapped for that one. But what's also interesting, if you look at the what is it? The I don't know which government agency. Maybe it's the Department of Labor or something. But they do this survey, right, of all the jobs, and the only job that has actually been completely lost in the last 100 years due to technology, there's only one job that has gone away: elevator operator. Now people have to push the button themselves and operate the elevator, by themselves without an expert. So there you go.
So you mentioned UBI, or universal basic income, and I like you, I'm starting to come around. People need money. They, the government said, stay home, get well, stay healthy. And by the way, your employer is, maybe we're going to give them money, maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to maybe we're going to bail out the landlord, maybe not. Maybe we're going to bail out the rent, maybe not. But this is, I do think this is coming. Is that? Do you think that it's coming soon, or you think it's going to be in the foreseeable future?
You know what? It's so many people would object so vociferously to it that I don't know how soon it'll come, but I kind of think it needs to happen because if you just give the money to the people directly and not to look, we saw in this last bill, everybody's so outraged about the foreign countries that got the money and this and that, and then when it comes to giving it to the businesses or the landlords, it's like that's all so uneven and it's so hard to figure out. What's simple is that if you just pay everybody $1,000 a month, it's done.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to spend that money. The rich will stick it in their bank account. Okay. So what? Maybe they'll invest it and they'll create, economic growth that way. But for sure, the poor will buy some groceries. Right.
Yeah, right.
And it's just simple. Now, here's the danger in it, though, and I know our friend George has talked about this a lot, and he's got some great content on it. But the way they're going to do it is the dangerous part, and they're going to do it ultimately, not initially, but ultimately it'll be through a digital currency like a digital dollar or Fed coin. It'll come on our phone, and they can program that money. That money is programmable, and that's what's scary about it, Ken, where they can say, look, you can only spend that money within a 5-mile radius of your home, or you have to spend it within 30 days or it expires or it loses value. So they can do all sorts of financial engineering and social engineering that is really quite scary. But that's another topic.
Yeah,
for another day.
I talked to George Gammon about that exact issue. It'll just come into your app, and then they can put a set of controls around it. So
they can decide what you're going to get to spend it on, what you're not, and the idea of having cash is like a civil rights issue, because the way you spend your money should be private. Maybe you don't want the government to know how you spend your money, and that should be your right.
So let's talk about this. I get this question a lot. In fact, it's probably the question I get. What advice are you giving your investors and the people that you're educating to help buy in some of these markets who have tenants that have trouble paying? Because obviously it is trickle up. What are you telling them to do?
In our world, we deal in the world of single family homes, and we really have had very few instances of tenants not paying rent. I mean, there are a few, but they're not many. In the more institutional world that you play in of apartments, and especially these aren't your apartments so much, but other institutional landlords that are investing in workforce housing where they have a lot of restaurant workers and so forth, those people are really struggling. And, the landlords are finding creative ways to work with people. But I would say, number one, approach things from an era of compassion, because this is not normally I would say you got to be strict with your tenants, because, society falls apart when people don't obey the contract, right? You got to have people obey contracts, or you have chaos. It just doesn't work. And, tenants are great at inventing all sorts of sob stories. And that's certainly true in the normal world, right? And you really got to take them with a grain of salt. Mostly don't believe them, okay? But in today's world, a lot of those stories are true. And people are having a hard time. And regardless of whether you believe them or not, you may not have the choice, right? Now, the interesting thing is you can still take the tenant to court and get a judgment against them for the money they owe you, but you can't kick them out. Remember, whenever you have a tenant defaulting on their rent obligation, there are two forms of action. Number one is an unlawful detainer, meaning you remove them from the property so you can put a tenant in the property that will pay you, right? And that's just eviction. But number two is getting a judgment for rent owed. Those are two different roads. Okay, usually they come together, but not always. So you can still take a collection action, at least in most jurisdictions. I think, I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on this stuff, but in a lot of jurisdictions, especially the Socialist Republic of California and the Socialist Republic of New York, you got real problems if you're a landlord in those places because you just have no rights. It's not going to be your choice and your savvy business dealings and your kind heart that is going to guide your actions. It's going to be very anti-landlord, landlord unfriendly regulations.
I agree. So let's jump over to businesses. Obviously, I just went on and saw that obviously we're well over 100,000 businesses that are permanently closed, and we don't really know. A lot of them have run out of PPP money. A lot of them are trying to adapt to these new changes in people's behaviors, and obviously, if you own an office, something at the bottom of an office building, and and nobody's going to work anymore, that coffee shop, that donut shop, that dry cleaner, that lunch place, the dinner place, the whatever, those are all going to be hurting. And so, what people don't realize, I think, well, maybe they do, but we're going to start to see massive state tax revenues go down because people own those. Those sales, those are real sales tax. Those are, there's lots of taxes paid all over the place, including the building itself. So what do you see, happening next? Because nobody's really talking about this massive tax issue that the states, if you just want to pick on New York City, might as well, or San Francisco or Chicago or whatever. These cities are not going to have the tax revenue that they had yet. They're certainly not going to shrink their expenses down. So what do you think is going to happen?
Ken, I think I have the perfect sound effect for it. It is bad news, and it affects these geographical areas unevenly, and mostly those are the left-leaning, high-density urban environments that were already suffering. These are places where businesses were already leaving, and now the crisis has just accelerated that problem so dramatically. So the tax base is going to be just diminished. It's awful. Sales taxes, you didn't mention property taxes, but there's going to be a lot of property tax defaults. These office buildings, these retail centers, they're not going to be paying their taxes. There's not going to be the sales tax revenue, and the income tax base is leaving too, because people that worked, for example, in New York City, and by the way, I think this is going in 2 rounds. They've moved outside of the city, and maybe they moved to New Jersey, which is no tax friendly place either, right? But it is more suburban in some parts, or they've moved one step away. But now that they realize that, maybe they can keep their job, or they've spent some of this lockdown time studying business or starting a business, and, they're going to move farther away into a less expensive jurisdiction with lower taxes even, and more space, more breathing room. And we talked about that on the other video I did with you on pandemic investing. But I think it is a huge problem. And we are going to see municipal bankruptcies, and it may not take the form of an actual bankruptcy in quotes, but insolvency, I'll put it that way. And we're going to see pressure on the federal government to bail them out. And they may or may not do that. I don't know. Services will be cut. Crime will increase as police and fire protection is cut, and services are cut dramatically. And what you didn't mention, but I know you were thinking of it, Ken, is that all of these commercial mortgage-backed securities, another giant tidal wave of defaults that will affect investors. So on that other round I mentioned, if you own municipal bonds, wow, that's not looking good. If you own commercial mortgage-backed securities of any kind, that is not looking good. Now, there's some commercial properties that aren't so bad. There are some retail properties that aren't so bad. Certainly your commercial properties, apartments, that are in high demand. So those are okay. Industrial properties are doing pretty well. Warehouses are big now with online shopping and so forth. But office and retail, not looking so good.
Yeah, yeah. So for those of you who don't understand what he just said about commercial mortgage-backed securities, what happens is when I go get a loan, I get debt, and then it gets sold off in the secondary market, and so it might be sitting in one of your pension plans or in one of your retirement plans, and so pension groups invest in mortgages, and so do insurance companies. They invest in mortgages, and so as those start to default, obviously nothing gets paid, and it ends up basically in your quarterly statement. So that's also another wave that's coming. Jason, awesome. Thank you. I want to, for the premium listeners, I want to go into that inflation piece that we're about ready to talk about some of the things that they could do and that example that you have. So we're going to jump over to our premium page where we can talk about that inflation piece and some of the things people can do. So again, Jason, thanks. As always, I appreciate you being on. You're a wealth of information.
Hey, Ken, my pleasure. Happy investing to you and all of your listeners and viewers.
For sure.